It's Monday, which means another episode of Mock Draft Monday. Today's theme, dueling mock drafts. We're going to have two mock drafts basically going head to head where the same team cannot make the same pick twice, whether that be the same player. And I'm going to try to avoid the same type of theme as well because we can think we know exactly what a team is going to do, and then we get to the draft and they completely surprise us by either the player that they take or even maybe the position that they draft. But as I've said for a while now on this channel, teams don't really draft to fill needs necessarily, especially with high picks in the draft, unless it's really like the finishing piece, but that's pretty rare. Needs are through free agency. The draft is for talent, and they try to marry that talent with the positional fit as well. Anyway, can't make the same pick. 2 picks per team. That way I can upset you guys twice. We're going to start off with the Tennessee Titans here. We are going to go quarterback. It's an option. We're going to go Cam Ward today. Again, I think it's an option. You pick it number 1 in the draft. If you are enamored by the tools of Cam Ward, there's absolutely a chance he's the first pick in the draft. He does have good overall arm talent. The flashy plays are very good. If you want to see a highlight reel and be impressed, Cam Ward's probably your guy. The down-to-down stuff, a little bit scarier. He holds onto the football forever, and maybe is it a little bit Zach Wilson-y at BYU, the way the protection holds up, and he can just really hold on to the ball for upwards of 5 seconds sometimes. It's absolutely ridiculous, but he is the first pick here for the Titans. But we'll go back to the Titans here and explore the other real plausible option, and that is Abdul Carter from Penn State. He is arguably the best player in the draft, but more than that, even if you think Travis Hunter is a better overall player or prospect, Abdul Carter plays the more premium position. Edge is just a more valuable position. If it works out, you can impact the game at a higher level than a corner, even slash wide receiver in Travis Hunter. You look at the Titans pass rush, they're really lacking off the edge. We know you need at least 2 in the NFL to really be a productive defense. 3 solid quality edge rushers would be ideal. And the Titans are really lacking, that top tier talent and depth. You look at Harold Landry, like him a lot as a player, but you need a little bit more. Abdul Carter, I think, makes a ton of sense there at number 1. He's arguably the best player in the draft. And again, plays that premium position. You want to talk about premium positions? It's like quarterback, offensive tackle, defensive line. And really, I would say edge more than interior defensive line, although it is quite close. And then you start to talk about, your wide receivers, corners, all the way down the board. You get to positions like running back, safety, linebacker, center. Guard is probably closer to the middle of that range than, some of the other positions I named. But yeah, punter and kicker somewhere way down the line. Unless Sebastian Janikowski's on the board, you're unlikely to see a first-round kicker. Back to mock draft number 1. It's the Cleveland Browns. Cam Ward was off the board first in this one, and the Browns have a couple of different options. I think we're going to go Abdul Carter here today. Myles Garrett potentially going to be traded. Abdul Carter, again, arguably one of the best players in the draft. You look at the Browns, certainly a need off the edge, and they're, again, lacking some top-tier talent, and especially if Myles Garrett is gone, it just makes sense to take arguably the best player available, especially at a position of need, especially a premium position. Abdul Carter is the pick. But also, here on this other side, I think the Browns could opt to go quarterback. With every quarterback on the board, they could go Cam Ward, they could go Shedeur Sanders. I actually think Sanders is a really good fit for Cleveland. Obviously, there have been a lot of discussions about whether or not Dion would allow Shedeur Sanders to go to Cleveland. Yes, it's a historically bad franchise. However, I don't think it's that bad of a situation for a young quarterback. You've got a decent overall offensive line. You've got some decent weapons at receiver, although could be needing more. And you have a pretty good offensive mind in Kevin Stefanski. I do think Shedeur Sanders is maybe a better fit, but we'll go Cam Ward here today because he is an option. Talked about him, of course, with that first Tennessee pick, but for the Browns, what it comes down to, again, is you get your pick of either quarterback on the board here, assuming there are really 2 top ones in this draft, even though it's not still a very good quarterback class, even at the top. I would say that for Cleveland, you can hopefully bank on the potential of Cam Ward. Deshaun Watson is not the answer, and there's not really a lot at quarterback. It's the most important position. If you have your pick of either on the board, you might opt to take one of those guys at number 2. Again, I think Shedeur Sanders, given his skill set, accuracy, and you'd like to think that he's going to be able to play in the structure of the offense with an actual offensive line. I don't know if Cam Ward's really going to be able to do that. He's more of a hero ball type guy, but if you can develop him and really get him to play more on time, you might have a starter level quarterback, and he is the pick there at number 2. Back over to mock draft number 1. It's the New York Giants. Cam Ward is off the board, but you still could consider a quarterback here. And we're going to go with Shedeur Sanders from Colorado. I think Joe Shane, the general manager of the Giants, Brian Daboll, probably to the end of the rope, to the end of the line a little bit. I think they're going to try and extend their tenures by drafting a quarterback. Their tenures are likely coming to an end unless you can turn around this ship in a hurry. The one thing really lacking on the Giants in the biggest way is quarterback. They've actually been able to beat some okay teams and win some games when they've had even somewhat acceptable quarterback play. And Shedeur Sanders, he's on the board. He gives you at least someone that can play quarterback. Shedeur to New York there with the Giants at number 3. But provided he's off the board, I think Travis Hunter is a very, very good selection. The Giants, I hope, don't choose to reach on a quarterback. I'm not enamored by the class. I don't know that any are true franchise options. And I think you have a combination of risk with Cam Ward and then risk plus ceiling with Shedeur Sanders. How good is he really going to be? Like, in the absolute perfect world, given his lack of top-tier arm talent and athleticism, he needs to be perfect as a processor playing on time. Maybe there's a 1% chance you get close to Joe Burrow, but more likely it's not close to that, right? More likely his ceiling's like a Geno Smith, and Geno's got a better arm than Shedeur Sanders. So I don't really know. It's an interesting conversation. With Hunter on the board here, you get someone that can play corner, be a CB1 for you, also potentially impact the game offensively, where the Giants are sorely lacking. Hunter can play on the outside, as can Malik Neighbors, but Neighbors can also be a weapon in the slot. So I think you put Neighbors in the slot. Travis Hunter can be your X at times. You can play him in different red zone packages, and I think he's got a chance to impact the game, score a lot of touchdowns, even as a part-time offensive player. With the Patriots at number 4, I love Travis Hunter being available for them for the same reasons really with the Giants. Hunter here, I think, could impact the game more as a wide receiver with this Patriots team. You have a true CB1 in Christian Gonzalez. Gonzo is an absolute monster. It makes no sense why he was available at the spot where he was ultimately selected, like 17 overall. I called it like the biggest steal of the draft when I made my draft videos for that draft year, and it really seems to be coming to fruition right now. He's been a pretty incredible player for New England. You just don't really hear about it too much because the Patriots have been so bad. But now you can build probably the best young CB duo in the league if Travis Hunter is able to develop. That would be a really, really fun mix. And Travis Hunter with Drake May on offense, that's a really fun idea as well. However, if you have to look a different direction, Patriots are on the clock. I think you could just take a true wide receiver in Teterow and McMillan. I also think maybe offensive line starts to get in play again as well. And again, that's with us being unable to select Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter here. Obviously, they're off the board, and we, of course, took him on this other side. So what are our options really? It's probably either Teterow or McMillan to give Drake May another weapon. Wide receiver is a position of weakness for the Patriots overall. They have a bunch of guys that could be okay, like Kendrick Bourne, Pop Douglas. Maybe you can get something out of Jalen Polk and, Kayshon Boutte. But who among those is a wide receiver 1? I named none of them, right? So you could just try and take one here at number 4. You also really need to protect Drake May. I think that's going to be something that's super important. I don't know. It's a different weird spot here for the Patriots. On the basis of maybe taking a receiver already at 4 and just best player available, in my opinion, in Travis Hunter, we're actually going to go offensive line here. What if Will Campbell goes a little bit higher in the draft than I've been expecting? I typically have him available at 9 or 10, but what if he goes at number 4? There's a chance he could stick a tackle. I still think his best home is probably at guard in the NFL, but try him at tackle. If he doesn't work, I think you're going to have a really solid guard. But if he does work, okay, you've got a solid left tackle. That's the hope with Will Campbell at number 4. So Drake may get some protection and a weapon in these dueling mock drafts, depending on what you want. Jags at number 5. Teteroa McMillan is available. Had that last time. People, you got to understand, contracts, injuries, aging players, these are all factors as to why a team might get a replacement, essentially. Christian Kirk is not a long-term answer for the Jags. His contract is expiring after next season, I believe. Gabe Davis isn't good and wasn't healthy in 2024, didn't really make any impact, and also, you're not really tied down to his contract long-term. Because last week I had the Jags taking Teteroa McMillan, something that I think is a clear option. Christian Kirk, expiring contract after 2025. Void years are not real years. They're just for cap purposes. Gabe Davis, expiring contract after 2026, and they have an out in the contract. I don't know if you'd take that with, nearly $15 million in dead cap. You could restructure it, work around it a little bit, but he's an answer for 2 years, and again, he's not very good. Was signed by what is now the old GM. Brian Thomas Jr. is an animal. Love him as a player. And then everybody else is a role player, like rotational guy. Devin Duvernay is more of a return man, hook 'em horns. Parker Washington, solid player. He's 5'10". He's a slot guy. He can be a good slot guy, but it's not going to stop you from getting an outside receiver like Teteroa McMillan. And I'm going to do that again at number 5. I think it's an option here. We're doing dueling mock drafts. We're going to have a couple of different options, a couple of different ways these can go. But I think Teteroa McMillan is a realistic option here for the Jags at 5. I also think there's a chance we see a bit of a fall from him, but he is a smooth mover at 6'5", 210, 212 pounds. He is good after the catch. He can really pluck the ball outside of his frame. This would be a really nice combination of weapons for Trevor Lawrence, something he really hasn't had in his career. You can see highlight tapes for days of receivers dropping balls that hit them right in the hands with Trevor Lawrence at quarterback. Brian Thomas Jr. is a home run selection after his 2024 rookie season. Teteroa McMillan can now work towards finalizing that receiving core and having a good group of guys for Trevor Lawrence to actually throw the football to and develop as a player. That offensive line needs work, but looks like free agency might be a better option, even, second round as well. However, in a world where we're not taking Teteroa McMillan at number 5, in mock draft number 2, I think you're probably in between 2, maybe 3 players. Mason Graham, Will Johnson, and with Will Campbell off the board, I don't really think you're going to see another offensive lineman go here at 5. I think absolute ceiling, Armand Membu at 4 or 5, but that's high, right? That's high for him, but he's a really solid player. I know Dane Brugler has him as a top 10 player in the draft. It's not necessarily out of the question, but of course we're not going to do that today. I think Mason Graham could just be the best player available. He is such an animal against the run, powerful, great at shedding blocks, and then as a pass rusher, he's got a surprising amount of quickness and finesse, although maybe still developing the power rush elements of his game. But he's got the strength, he's got the size. I mean, this guy's built like a bulldog. 6'3", 320, brick shithouse type of a player. And Mason Graham here is just arguably the best player available on an interior defensive line that needs help. Again, the Jags fans have really been pissed at me in these mock drafts, and I have some type of need compulsively to be right all the time. I'm going to explain to you why I think that interior defensive line is not only a need, but a really good fit with best player available, potentially, in Mason Graham here at 5. Back to the depth chart. So, of your interior defensive linemen, you have Devon Hamilton, Eric Armstead, Jeremiah Ledbetter, Mason Smith, Tyler Lacey, Jordan Jefferson. Jefferson got drafted way too high. Way too high. This was a guy that was maybe draftable. It was at number 116. I don't know that he's going to be on the roster by this time next season, unless he takes some type of an amazing step. Ledbetter has been a rotational or backup player his entire career. Mason Smith has potential. Right now, I would say he's more of a rotational interior defensive lineman. I like Mason Smith a lot. His potential, I think, is ridiculous. Pre-injury at LSU, this guy was actually a freak, but misses all of 2022, comes back in 2023, doesn't exactly dominate, ends up going at 48 instead of 8 maybe in the draft, but he's got top 10 type potential. I think in my, first mock draft, when Mason Smith was eligible, I had him as a top 10 pick or at least a first round pick. So the potential is great and always really has been, but I don't think you can necessarily bank on him as an every down player, but he's got the most potential. And then you look at your projected starters, Devon Hamilton, Eric Armstead. Let's take a look at the contracts. Eric Armstead is 31 years old. He'll turn 32 next season. He is not under contract after 2026. For first round picks, you have a minimum of 4 years guaranteed plus the 5th year option. So if you draft a good player with the selection, you have 5 years of team control, essentially, to use kind of a baseball term there, but 5 years of team control. So if you draft a guy like Mason Graham to go with Mason Smith, kind of a fun combo, you will have 2025, 2026, 2027, 2028 minimum if you want him, plus an option for 2029. That would already be 3 years without Eric Armstead, and I think he's a potential cap casualty. I think that's a possibility in 2026, depending on how his 2025 goes. I was going to say age, not really a concern for Devon Hamilton. He is 28 now, but age not really a concern in my opinion. However, he is only under contract as well through 2026. So going in, and he's got no pass rush upside. He's got none. All that to say, I think interior defensive line's on the table. I mean, I don't know why I spent so much time rationalizing that. I think one of the same guys that critiqued me also listed Arden Key as a reason why they don't need interior defensive line. One, he doesn't play interior defensive line. And two, maybe most importantly of all, he doesn't play on the Jaguars. That's maybe the most important. He doesn't play on your team. He hasn't now for 2 seasons. But to prove these people are real, here you go. Anyway, off to the Raiders. Raiders here at number 6. Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders off the board. Quarterback, not an option. However, over here we do have Mason Graham. We have Will Johnson. Seems like to be a good fit with Pete Carroll. I think, is there an outside shot it's ever Will Campbell just to get a really solid offensive lineman in the mix? Maybe, but I think more than likely you're looking at, I think, Ashton Genty. This is like, I think the top end of his range. Like the earliest he could really go is to the Raiders. They really could use an upgrade at running back, and Genty is a phenomenal running back. One of the best players in this draft. He's an amazing, amazing player. Amazing player. So if you were going to take a running back here, we have seen teams take running backs high recently. Bijan was the 8th pick. Jahmyr Gibbs went at like 12. These are options, right? Genty could absolutely go at 6. I think there's a real world where you consider him a better running back prospect than Bijan. To be honest, it's close, but there's a real world where that's a possibility, and certainly better than Jahmyr Gibbs, who is worse than Bijan, even though also a tremendous prospect. Love Jahmyr Gibbs in that class. But again, it's early for a running back, but he can really turn around the offense in a world where you can't get a quarterback here because they're off the board. I do think Genty makes a lot of sense there. It's the early range for him, and guess what? If you didn't like the Genty selection because the Raiders need to focus on maybe more than just adding a running back, especially in a strong running back class, guess what? You got another pick to make. So let's go ahead, make that second pick here for the Las Vegas Raiders, even though Genty is an incredible player. This is one of those picks probably where fans might complain on draft night because, we took a running back at 6. We have so many other needs. That can be filled through free agency or later down the board. This is arguably a just best player available type selection. Genty is an animal, and then when you see him rush for 1,500 yards as a rookie, which would be insane, but maybe a real possibility with his usage at Boise State, I think you probably stop complaining pretty quickly. The same way that Lions fans embraced the Jahmyr Gibbs pick as soon as that guy started proving to be one of the better running backs in the league. So you can hate it because it's a running back, but it's also one of the best players in the draft. At number 6 with no QBs on the board, he's a tremendous player, but don't necessarily have to do that at 6 because in this draft, Teteroa McMillan is here, Will Johnson is here. I also think there's a chance that it's Mason Graham, but we went Genty for that selection. I think the Raiders could also stand to upgrade at wide receiver. Teteroa McMillan ends up being the selection. That offense needs a revamp. You're going to be forced to get a bridge quarterback. Aaron Rodgers to the Raiders could be exactly the crazy offseason media story that the NFL needs. Man. But Teteroa McMillan gives whoever's playing quarterback a weapon to work with, a big-bodied receiver that might be a little bit high. We had him to the Jags at 5, Raiders now at 6. He's not necessarily guaranteed to be a top 10 guy, but in a weaker receiver class with teams needing wide receiver, maybe he gets pushed up the board. He's a really, really solid overall prospect. Raiders at 6, I think, makes a lot of sense. Jets at 7. I think you love both Michigan men being available. I think it'd be tough to pass on Mason Graham with this pick for the same reasons we talked about him to the Jags. Great fit here with the Jets, just needing more on the interior. Now, the Jets do have a better player on the interior D-line than the Jags do in Quinnen Williams. However, getting a dynamic duo is really going to help that pass rush overall, and it'll help, this Jets team stop the run as well. You look at what you're facing in division. James Cook had a pretty good season for the Bills, and obviously you have to worry about Josh Allen as well. But we know the Dolphins love to run the ball, but bottom line is you take best player available. I think it's pretty clearly Mason Graham here, and you upgrade your team overall. But if that's not going to be the pick, I think you also have pretty good options with Will Johnson, potentially even with Tyler Warren at the top end here. I also think one of the edge rushers out of Georgia is in play. We're going to include Jalen Walker in that mix. He's here somewhere. So the Jets could also go with Jalen Walker off the edge with Mykel Williams. I think Shamar Stewart you start to talk about in this range as well, just because he's a freak athlete at, over 280 pounds, 6'6", but moves like a freak. I mean, this guy has unbelievable quickness, explosiveness to go with his strength. The production is going to end up coming in the NFL for Shamar Stewart. He's a really, really good player. I think you're going to start to talk about these edge rushers going off the board. The Jets is absolutely a spot where it could happen, and I'm tempted to do that. I think there's a real chance Will Johnson falls in the draft from everything that I'm hearing, but he's also a really solid player. We talked about some similar things with Derek Stingley with a drop based off some lackluster play the year leading into the draft for him. But for Will Johnson, the tape a couple of years ago was so good. Injury this year kind of hurt him. But if he comes to the combine, tests well, I think a lot of these concerns about Johnson falling heavily in the draft will be put to bed. And I think, will solidify himself as a top 10 pick. If that doesn't happen, maybe we talk about a fall outside of the top 10 or maybe even the top 15. But at number 7, it's hard to go wrong here with Will Johnson. He's got the size, he's got the ball skills and playmaking ability. It's just, does he play a little bit too aggressive at times? And that's a concern. But he is the pick there at number 7. Panthers at number 8. I'm going to kick this off with one of my favorite selections. I just think it makes a ton of sense. We're going to start with Jalen Walker. I know I've done this a lot, but man, I love his ability to get after the quarterback off the edge. I also think he provides a ton of value as a spy. He's a really, really good athlete that is still developing as a player overall, but apparently very high character, leader in the locker room. He's also a North Carolina kid. I feel like there's a lot of good fits here that make him an awesome developmental piece with the Carolina Panthers as a versatile type guy that can impact the game in a couple of different ways, but I think his best fit is going to be off the edge long term. And I think the Panthers' defensive scheme is a really good fit for it. Now, you might also opt to go with a more traditional edge rusher. And I still think one of the Georgia guys makes a ton of sense, whether it's Jalen Walker or Mykel Williams. I also think Shamar Stewart starts to be in play here at, 7, at 8, certainly at 9, even at 10, at 11. Like, Shamar Stewart, I think, is going to go, I think he's like a top 15 lock, it feels like, just based off of his upside and the way teams will draft historically. I mean, his upside is just insane, but I think the same of Mykel Williams. And I do think it should be something in the front 7 with Tetairoa McMillan off the board. You can't really get a receiver here to help out Bryce Young. A little bit early, it feels like, for Luther Burden, even though I really love him as a player. I'm going to go with Mykel Williams here. So one way or another, we go with a Georgia guy. This is kind of taking the same position in a way, because I imagine their impact is both going to be made off the edge. But Walker's more of the hybrid guy. Williams is more of the true edge. And you'll see from the size here just how true that is at 6'5", 265 pounds. And his upside, when healthy, is insane. Dominated Texas a couple of times this year. He's got maybe as much potential as anybody in this draft. He just played hurt all of 2024. But his upside's going to get him drafted high. I think he's going to end up being a top 10 type selection. At number 9, we have the New Orleans Saints. Will Campbell makes a ton of sense for me here. And I think that's going to end up being the selection with this first pick. Will Campbell is just arguably the best offensive lineman in this draft. You look at the Saints, you get to keep him in the boot. Will Campbell can play guard, can potentially play tackle for you, obviously, as well. If you watched him at LSU, he could be one of the better players in this draft. I think whether it's at tackle, but especially at guard, you're going to have a solid starter here. I think Will Campbell ends up being a very safe selection, very smart offensive lineman, and there's a ton of value to that. And Campbell ends up being just BPA here for the Saints at number 9. I also think Genty makes a ton of sense here to the Saints, but maybe there's a chance he falls and the Saints opt to go with something on the other side of the ball, and I think it could be something off the edge. Shamar Stewart, we talked about his potential. I really think it's insane, and I think for the Saints, they have a certain body type that they like, and it's Shamar Stewart. 6'6", again, Senior Bowl was like 281, but maybe could play as heavy as 290. I think with the Saints here, you have a couple of different options. You have needs off the edge, but really on the interior defensive line as well. And if Shamar Stewart's at 280 or 290 pounds, he can play inside. And maybe that's only on third downs for you, or like clear pass rush type scenarios. But this is a base every down end that can slide inside on obvious pass downs and really impact the game from that way. But he's got the quickness to be a monster edge as well. So he could just be an every down edge for you. Really, really good player with a ton of potential. He is the 9th pick in the draft here in mock draft number 2. Back to the Chicago Bears. Will Campbell off the board, I think, presents the Bears with a bit of a tough spot here. No Genty on the board. No Will Campbell on the board. I think those are probably the top 2 names for the Chicago Bears here. Outside of that, I think you're looking at something on the defensive line in general. Maybe this is as high as Walter Nolan goes, or maybe it's an edge rusher. Mykel Williams is still available. Shamar Stewart in this scenario is still available. And maybe you could also talk about like Armand Membu, right? In this scenario, we're going to end up going with Mykel Williams here from Georgia. The Bears really do have a need off the edge. Mykel Williams, for all the reasons we talked about, could be a really good fit there for Chicago. Again, a ton of potential as well. But on the other hand, could you consider Ashton Genty with this pick? Or could you go with something on the offensive line with Membu available, with Kelvin Banks, Josh Simmons, with Tyler Booker somewhere in here as well? These are all pretty good options. And I think that even though Genty makes a ton of sense for this pick, I also think there's a real scenario where the Bears come out of here with an offensive lineman in some capacity. And I think Armand Membu makes a ton of sense here at number 10. He could play tackle, but I think is a really good fit here at guard. And for the Chicago Bears, it really depends on what you're trying to draft with this pick. If you want someone that can stick at left tackle potentially, I think it's more likely going to be Simmons and then maybe Kelvin Banks. Simmons has the injury stuff, but with Membu, he's played right tackle at Mizzou. The Bears already have a right tackle in Darnell Wright. So you're looking more here at a guard or maybe a Tryman at left tackle. He's a good athlete, but I think that's a pretty rare transition to see somebody make, college right tackle to NFL left tackle. Not saying it's impossible or that we've never seen it. It's just a little uncommon, a little unusual. As we get to the 49ers at 11. So I'm looking at the talented edge rushers in this draft here. There are a lot still available. Mykel Williams just off the board in this one. And I think that's probably where we look. Get someone that can impact the quarterback. And I really like the selection of Shamar Stewart there last time around. And I think the Niners, with needs all over the defensive line, take the big-bodied but super athletic Shamar Stewart. Again, he's got limitless potential. Really, really good player. And I know the production's not there. I think it's going to end up being there at the NFL level. The traits, the tools are just too good. And again, for the Niners, you have needs off the edge and interior D-line as well. Stewart can fill both of those. At number 11 on this side, though, I think offensive line is absolutely in play. I also really like the idea of taking a Jalen Walker here. Again, for the same reasons that you like, Shamar Stewart, because you need help off the edge. He's like the hybrid IDL edge, whereas Jalen Walker is like the hybrid edge linebacker. Who knows how long Dre Greenlaw is going to be in San Francisco? Like, it's easy. I always see fans in the comments say, oh, we're re-signing him. You don't know that until it happens. So in these mock drafts, we have to, potentially think about life after Dre Greenlaw. And not to say that Jalen Walker is a one-for-one Dre Greenlaw replacement. If you're doing that, you might look for Jahad Campbell from Alabama. But Walker playing outside linebacker and then also sliding down to rush the passer, I feel like is a really, really fun fit. But I think we're going to get one of the offensive linemen off the board. And I am going to go with Josh Simmons from Ohio State. He was injured, in October maybe for the Buckeyes, but is overall a really, really good player and posted maybe the best tackle tape of anybody in this draft. For the Niners, you don't necessarily need to play him in year one. You can give him some time to really rehab that injury, come back at truly 100%, and continue to develop as a player behind arguably the best left tackle of all time in Trent Williams. Is it a little bit high for Josh Simmons? Maybe. But if it works out, you've got a Pro Bowl type tackle. Cowboys at number 12. Well, you've got some pretty good players that have become available to you. Malachi Starks. I still really like a Jalen Walker fit. Obviously, he's not on the board in this scenario. And I think you would have to consider offensive line here as well. You've got Membu still here. You've got Banks. You've got Simmons. I think Simmons makes a ton of sense here as well. But I'm just worried if I'm getting him off the board a little bit too early. Because Simmons makes sense, though. Yeah, I really actually do like the fit here. I am gonna go Josh Simmons. Here's my reasoning. New head coach coming in. His great, well, I guess in a way coming in. He was with the Cowboys already in Brian Schottenheimer, right? But a lot of what he likes to do revolves around good offensive line play, which you can say really for, every offense, but especially so, I think, with Brian Schottenheimer. And for the Cowboys, Josh Simmons is a left tackle. He will be playing left tackle for you. Tyler Smith, one of the best guards in the league, really, at left guard. But Tyler Guyton gets to play a more natural right tackle. He was a first-round pick. You obviously have high expectations for him as a future starter for you. He's a right tackle. We talked about right tackle in college moving to left tackle in the NFL. It's a little bit rare, doesn't always work, not always the best. However, here you don't have to do it anymore. If you draft a left tackle at 12, you can move Guyton to right tackle and then have the best of both worlds on the O-line. I think there's obviously a very real possibility that the Cowboys choose to go something on the defensive line as well. I still feel like Jalen Walker is a really, really good fit for them. But on this other side, Genty's still on the board. He's just arguably a top 3 player in the draft, maybe even slightly better than that. Genty's going to be highly productive, I would imagine, in the NFL. And for a Cowboys team that really needs a better running back in the mix, You can't rely on Rico Dowdle long term. He is an unrestricted free agent. Now, he might be back in Dallas, but still, we don't know. There's a contingency of Cowboys fans. There's a contingent, of Cowboys fans that really don't want Genti. But if you can get one of the best players in the draft at 12, and it's a position of need, and it's a Boise State player, as the Cowboys love the Boise State connection, it makes a lot of sense because it makes a lot of sense. Or like it's too obvious. No, but it is for a reason, though. This is a good pick. At number 13, we have the Miami Dolphins. And the Dolphins have some options here. Will Campbell, Josh Simmons off the board on the offensive line. I think with this first pick, we are going to do something on the O-line here. Whether that be Banks, Membu, or Tyler Booker, we're going to have an offensive lineman go off the board at this pick. I think also in play, Tyler Warren. You can address offensive line in free agency. Tyler Warren would be a decent pickup here for the Miami Dolphins. He might not even be available at 13 in real life. I think I'm going to go Membu. I really like him here. I think he's got a chance to play right tackle long term for Miami. See about Austin Booker, but I also think he's got a really good, spot, really good home at guard. And I think there's a chance that if you're drafting for a left tackle, you go for Kelvin Banks. He maybe gives you a little bit more flexibility because he's got, a history of playing left tackle at Texas. Maybe a chance to stick a tackle, but also can be a guard. It's like Membu might be the better prospect compared to Kelvin Banks, but Banks has the history of left tackle and a little bit better size, whereas Membu has the history of playing right tackle and not so great size. If you're Miami, long term, is it Teron Armstead or is it Austin? Did I say Booker? I meant Austin Jackson. If I said Booker, my fault. That is a defensive end for Chicago. I know Patrick Paul was taken in the second round last year. Maybe he's your future at left tackle, but maybe not. But yeah, definitely great pickup at guard or potentially even right tackle. Austin Jackson only under contract through 2026, so we'll see. On the other side, I think we have a one of three. I think you're looking at Malachi Starks to replace Javon Holland. I think you're looking at Walter Nolan to go with high upside interior defensive lineman, your Christian Wilkins replacement you lost a year ago. And then also, I think Tyler Warren, very much in play here. Jonnu Smith, not under contract long-term, not a true inline tight end anyway. I think Warren offers you a big-bodied tight end that can be a monster in the receiving game, can also block a little bit. So you really have a coin flip. We addressed offensive line with the first pick. Which direction do we want to go with this second? I think I want to go Tyler Warren. I did it last week. I think there are a lot of other ways that the Dolphins can go about this, but I think for a historically offensive-minded team, you might look to help out that offense even more. Maybe losing Tyreek Hill long-term. Get another offensive weapon in the mix in the big tight end out of Penn State. And then the Colts at 14. Wow. What a board for them. Will Johnson, Malachi Starks, Tyler Warren. All available. All good fits, in my opinion. Johnson falling even more, I think, is a possibility. So he's not necessarily the pick here at 14, even though I think it makes a lot of sense. But is his athletic testing going to fit what Chris Ballard typically likes to do? Loves the really, really incredible athletes. I think Warren's going to end up testing pretty well. He's off the board in this other mock, which has, potentially complicated things. But man, the board has just fallen absolutely perfectly for the Colts at 14. I think Will Johnson would be a tough name to turn down here at number 14. I really do. I think they could absolutely use an upgrade at corner. Safety as well, obviously. Tight end as well. The counter is it's a really, really good tight end class. And with Colston Loveland potentially being available in the second round, although I think he's probably a first-round pick, with Gunnar Helm, Elijah Arroyo, Mason Taylor, you've got some really good options at tight end that can come in and make an immediate impact. I know Harold Fannin put up some incredible numbers, but Will Johnson ends up being the pick here at 14. On the other side, could continue to lean into DB and go Malachi Starks. I'm not really sure what your options are here at this pick. Would have loved for Tyler Warren to be here, but Will Johnson becoming available, I think, was just too much to turn down. We're just going to go Malachi Starks. Yes, it's two DBs. I kind of wanted to mix things up, but Starks is a safety, whereas Will Johnson's a boundary corner. Starks can also play the nickel. I think he played multiple safety spots as well. At his best, he is a dynamic playmaker that can play over the top in single high, can obviously work in two high. Really good athlete, really instinctive, leader, good size, great player for a team that needs an upgrade in the back end. Well, you found it here in these mock drafts, that's for sure. At 15, have the Atlanta Falcons. A number of really good edge rushers are available. And if you want to go interior defensive line, you have, of course, Walter Nolan maybe being the best option. But at 15 here, it's a name that's caught a lot of steam, had a good Senior Bowl, has been very productive. You need help off the edge for the Atlanta Falcons. We're going to go Mike Green here for Marshall. Shocking to see a player from Marshall go this high in the draft. I don't think we've seen that since Byron Leftwich, maybe, was a first-round pick out of Marshall. I feel like he was a top 10 pick. But now I have to figure it out. I want to say 7th overall, 2003. That feels a lot of wrong, but we'll see. It was actually completely correct. All right, well, we'll take that. I felt like he was 7th overall. I didn't remember the year exactly, so I'm happy to do that. Anyway, Mike Green here is the pick here for Atlanta. Really incredible pass rusher who's also great against the run, which you wouldn't think at his size. He ended up being 251 at the Senior Bowl, was productive in the one-on-ones. I think he's going to be a really good player. Short arms, but I think he's going to be a really, really good player. I don't think his pass rush game is necessarily predicated on getting his arms on you first, and I think he wins the leverage game in the trenches in the run game. So I don't know that short arms is going to be too much of an issue for Mike Green. I just think he's a twitchy animal and will find a way to be productive. I know this is not exactly what you expect from Terry Fontenot, the Falcons GM, but here we're finally going to upgrade the pass rush with a monster edge rusher in Mike Green. But I'm ignoring James Pierce with this selection, even though I think he ends up going top 20. I think he's too talented. I think the upside's too great for him as a pass rusher. I think he's going to be a top 20 guy, but we're going to ignore the double edge rush here. So at 15, the pick to me that makes the most sense is actually a linebacker. It's Jahad Campbell from Alabama. I think he can also impact the game off the edge, but I love him as a linebacker. I think he has a chance to play Mike, but is probably best served either Sam or even Will. And I think with his size at 245 pounds, 6'3", his type of speed, his ability to go sideline to sideline and drop in coverage makes him a really intriguing prospect. Someone that had a real breakout season in 2024, you're thinking is maybe only going to get better. For the Falcons here, I think it's actually a really, really solid selection. I love Jahad Campbell. As we move to the Cardinals at 16. Kelvin Banks is on the board. I definitely like that. So we're going to replace one Kelvin with another. Kelvin Beachum, gone. Enter Kelvin Banks, though, out of Texas. Hook 'em horns. Again, chance to play guard. Chance to stick at left tackle. I think if he goes to play left tackle, Paris Johnson goes back over to that right side. Boom. You're set up. Banks, I think, is a really solid selection here. Really solid player. Upgrade in one way, shape, or form on the O-line. Really, really like Kelvin Banks, obviously, as a Texas fan. We'll see where he ends up going in the draft. I think there's a chance he falls a little bit further than expected. If it's not something on the offensive line, though, I think it is something on the defensive line. I think you're looking somewhere in the trenches, and I really do like the idea of Walter Nolan here from Ole Miss. I think that interior defensive line does not look very good. And I do think they're going to be really talented edge rushers available in round 2. You look at guys like Princely Uman Mielen. Jack Sawyer, I think, will definitely be there in round 2. Nick Scorton could get down there. Ezaraku could get down there. I think JT Tuimoloau will be available. I think Jordan Burch will be one of those names that you hear a little bit earlier than maybe you expect. Same thing with Jared Ivey, to be honest, from Ole Miss. Ole Miss had a tremendous defensive line this past season with Uman Mielen, Walter Nolan, Jared Ivey, and then also Suntarine Perkins making an impact. Not really a defensive lineman. He's like 210 pounds, if that, but certainly was very productive. I think double-digit sacks for him. He's a monster. Think about like Harold Perkins, who is headed back to LSU. But Walter Nolan, highly thought of interior defensive lineman, former #1 recruit in the nation. I say that every time. but it's true. He was number 1 or 2, depending on where you looked, along with Travis Hunter, and had a breakout season for Ole Miss. And the thing with these guys with the high prospect pedigree, the athleticism is typically different, and he is explosive as hell. So we've gone in the trenches here to help out the Arizona Cardinals, but what about for the Cincinnati Bengals? I'll tell you what, with Tyler Warren available, I am tempted. But I also think you really need to improve your pass rush, and it really feels like James Pierce wouldn't be the worst pick in the world here. You look on the interior defensive line, here we have Walter Nolan. I hope this isn't tough to follow. I think it may end up being that way, but we'll see. For the Bengals here at 17, I mean, Malachi Starks, I also feel like is a pretty decent selection. Could end up going with, Xavier Watts in round 2. Al Golden, Notre Dame, DC, now with the Bengals. That could be a fit, and go with the more valuable pass rush position here at 17. And yeah, maybe we keep James Pierce in orange. Send him to Cincinnati. Get a big-time pass rusher in the mix. He's definitely light. He's got a light frame. He's like 240 pounds, but super explosive, very productive as a rusher. I think he ends up being a top 20 guy for those reasons. But a lot within the draft community seem to think he's going to fall. So we'll see what happens there. If the Bengals don't go with James Pierce at 17, who's also available on the board here, as is Mike Green, as is Jalen Walker, that's definitely an interesting fit. What I could have done is gone like Jahad Campbell with this pick in this draft and then taken an edge rusher here, but we're going to go a different direction. And that might be something on the interior D-line. I think there's also a chance that this is Tyler Booker, maybe at guard. I think that's an option. Could be Derek Harmon as well. I don't mind that. But yeah, let's get an upgrade in there at guard. I think we're going to go Tyler Booker with this pick. Calvin Banks still going to be there. Let's go Tyler Booker. Plug and play option there at guard. And I think the Bengals, you look at their depth chart right now, it's pretty weak on the interior. You're choosing in between Cordell Volson, Alex Kappa, who I feel like might end up being an Alex Kappa casualty. Super funny. And then Jackson Kirkland's like whatever. Yeah, Kappa's super easy to cut in the final year of his deal anyway. I know that defense needs some help, but continuing to protect Joe Burrow, I don't think is a bad idea. Invest resources in your most valuable asset, and that is protecting Joe Burrow, obviously. So we're going to go Tyler Booker here at number 17. Bit of an interesting pick there. I've never connected those dots before, but I think it's in play as we get to the Seahawks at 18. And now I think Tyler Warren starts to be in play with this pick. It's very interesting that he's available. Certainly something on the interior defensive line also makes sense. Luther Burden also makes sense. You look at the long-term fit with the Seahawks, and who knows if DK Metcalf's going to be there long-term. Tyler Lockett, maybe approaching the twilight of his career, certainly with the Seahawks. So it's just JSN. Only problem stopping Burden from going there is Burden's maybe his most effective in the slot. So maybe not the most worthwhile pickup at 18, even though I think he can play the Z and I think he can be effective in that role. I kind of think Tyler Warren is just too good to be available right now. I know he plays one of the least valuable positions overall, but I think a really good tight end can also be really valuable. You look at the Seahawks tight end room, I'm not sure Noah Fant is going to be there long term. Really thought a lot about this. I think this just ends up being best player available. Tyler Warren is a fantastic player and ends up being a plug-and-play starter. And I think if you're losing receivers potentially with Lockett, maybe Metcalf, you need somebody to impact the game as a pass catcher, and maybe the offense runs through Warren and JSN over the middle. I think that is certainly an interesting combo as we get to the Seahawks at 18. And I'll tell you what, I really like the idea of going Jalen Walker here at 18. He is someone that can play off the ball, but I think, again, can really impact the game off the edge. I think he'd be a really good fit in the Mike McDonald defense. I think Walker would be productive. And again, off the edge, he's got a lot of potential. I think the Seahawks could definitely look to improve their pass rush. The only thing that makes this a bit of a weirder selection is if you're drafting him to be a true edge, he's not really the size that they typically like. I know they like, the 270-pound defensive ends that don't really offer a ton of burst. But then they took Boye Mafe, right? And he's been a good player for them when he's been healthy. I think Walker offers you some unreal athleticism, and then maybe you also like him as a linebacker. I think he gives John Schneider some different options there at 18. And listen, I know you need offensive line help. I can appreciate that. I really can. Kelvin Banks is absolutely an option here. But I think if Seattle's trying to draft a guard, they're going to do it down the board. John Schneider, time and time again, has said that guard is the most overdrafted, overpaid position in the NFL. I don't think he's going to do it in the first round. So we're going to wait for round 2. But if you're taking Banks to play tackle, he's obviously in play, and then could also play guard or tackle if there's an injury. So Banks is obviously absolutely in play, absolutely an option. Here, we're going to ignore that. Bucks at number 19. Well, you've got some decent options here. I like adding something off the edge. There's not really a lot available with the way the board has fallen here. There really isn't. So I think you'd need to pivot potentially. And obviously, I've talked a lot about how much I like the Jihad Campbell fit here. That's going to end up being my pick at 19. He is a really, really good athlete. I talked about him when he went off the board in the other mock draft, but a really good athlete with really good size. Breakout season in 2024. Can absolutely rush the passer. Was a 5-star edge Alabama commit out of high school and is athletic enough and smooth enough in coverage to be an impact player in that way. Can go sideline to sideline. Look at the Bucks. Linebacker, not looking great for them. Levante David may be gone, and there just isn't much there. So Jihad Campbell, I think, is an obvious fit, and I think a top 20 player in this draft. Now, on the other side of that, you still need to improve your pass rush. There's some really good edge rushers available. James Pierce, Mike Green. We're going to go with Mike Green here. Really good fit for the defense as well. And really, really explosive, twitchy pass rusher that can play against the run. Feels like he's going to help the secondary perform at a higher rate because if you can force the ball out quicker, DBs don't have to cover for as long. Love Mike Green. At number 20, have the Denver Broncos. Well, you've got some really good receivers on the board. At tight end, it's really just Colston Loveland. Warren fell to 18. Didn't quite make it to 20. But I think you could absolutely go receiver here. Now, historically, Sean Payton has loved his Ohio State receivers. So Ibuka just feels like an obvious fit. But Luther Burden's available, and that receiver room could absolutely use some help. It really could. You've got some okay guys and Cortland Sutton. Troy Franklin's a deep threat. Marvin Mims, I don't think, is ever going to be a top 2 receiver on this team. But Luther Burden, I think, absolutely could be. He can play in the slot. He can be a weapon for Sean Payton, especially after the catch. I love the fit of Luther Burden to Denver. At number 20, on the other side, I love the idea of adding Colston Loveland. Snipe him from the Chargers and Jim Harbaugh. You need help at tight end. Now, Loveland is not a traditional inline guy. He is like 245 pounds, but just isn't that type of a player, isn't that type of a blocker. But he doesn't need to be in the Sean Payton offense. Was Jimmy Graham some unbelievable blocker? No. Still was highly productive, still made a ton of plays in that Sean Payton offense. I think Colston Loveland can do the same. Steelers at 21. Malachi Starks is just here. That's the thing. He's so good, so instinctive. He's available at 21. I love Deshaun Elliott. Hook him. He was actually one of my favorite players at Texas over the past decade, really. Love him as a player. However, here's the thing. Not under contract after 2025. Malachi Starks is on the board. I'm pulling the trigger. I just think he's a Steelers type player. He's not afraid to come up and tackle. He's tough. He's instinctive. By all accounts, he's a leader. Feels like a really good fit here for Pittsburgh. Just clear and obviously the best player available, maybe at a less valuable position. It's why he's available, and maybe less than spectacular 2024 tape. But I still think Starks is like a top 5 player in this draft. He's available at 21. I think you pull the trigger here. And I know the Steelers on the other side here typically don't go wide receiver in the first round, but you've got some really good ones available. I'm going to go Luther Burden, keeping him in those same colors from Mizzou here to the Steelers in the black and gold, the black and yellow, maybe more like it. And Luther Burden, great after the catch, can be a monster in the slot. I think he's a reliable number 2 option. Maybe not as reliable in terms of the hands as like an Emeka Ibuka or a Matthew Golden, but his explosive ceiling is definitely a little bit higher. Love him as a player. Arguably the best wide receiver in this draft. At number 22, Chargers here. I think you got to go with the first obvious pick, Colston Loveland. Loveland, for all the reasons we just talked about with Denver, is a really good fit here at number 22. He can be a weapon in the passing game. The Chargers need a lot more of that. But they also need help on the other side of the ball. They also need help at guard. And Kelvin Banks could be a plug-and-play starter at guard. Maybe there would be some growing pains as he's been a tackle. But I also think they need to address that interior defensive line. Derek Harmon as a pass rush option. Kenneth Grant, very solid run stopper. Pad level gets a little bit too high, but hopefully you can coach that out of him. It just seems to be like an obvious Michigan connection there to Jim Harbaugh. You got 2 players that should be available in this range that are probably worth being drafted in this range that Jim Harbaugh had at Michigan, national champions. I feel like it's going to be tough to turn those guys down. So I know it's lame to go 2 Michigan guys here to the Chargers, but you look at their needs and it feels like they're extremely good fits. Packers at 23. Walter Nolan potentially in play. It seems like the Packers like what they have off the edge. So I'm not sure that you're going to force an edge rusher with who's on the board here, even though they weren't incredibly productive last season. I really like Jahdae Barron, of course. I like Azariah Thomas. I think you got some options here if you were the Green Bay Packers. I love Savone Revel. Like, in this range, I should say. Like, these corners are quite good. Barron has the most flexibility. I don't know that he's the best fit in Green Bay because of who you already have there. Like, because you're not necessarily drafting a nickel or a safety with this pick. You're probably looking for a boundary corner, which Revel makes more sense. Azariah Thomas makes more sense. Even Maxwell Hairston. Or Morrison, I'm not sure he's a first rounder, but we'll see. But I know you need help on the boundary here. I'm really in between Revel and Azariah Thomas. I think both are good fits. Thomas you lean to maybe because of the health, whereas Savone Revel suffered a season-ending injury in 2024. Maybe falls a little bit because of that, but his upside's crazy. Thomas, maybe not as explosive of an athlete. Well, definitely not compared to Savone Revel, but has very good size, 6'2", 200 pounds, can definitely play press and play physical at the line. That's a good fit in Green Bay. Thomas goes off the board. With their second pick here, you could look to get something off the edge. James Pierce is still available. So if you want an explosive rotational pass rusher, Pierce is here. My only kind of pause with that is that, again, from a body type perspective, this is not the type of guy that the Packers like. They like guys like Nick Scorton at 285 pounds. You know, Lucas Van Ness, Rashawn Gary. They don't really like 240-pound James Pierce as much, right? So I just don't think he's exactly the best fit there for Green Bay. But we're not going corner here, so what do? I think Kelvin Banks is in play to play left tackle. I really do. And I also think he's an option at guard. I think you look at how Goody likes to draft historically. Big SEC tackle maybe in play. Now, you drafted Jordan Morgan last year, who was another like tackle to guard type guy. I also think interior defensive line is in play. You look at what the Packers have: Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, Colby Wooden, TJ Slayton, Carl Brooks, I would say, are the ones that stand out. Tadaro Slayton is a nose. I don't know what you're really expecting from Colby Wooden. To me, he really feels like a bit of a tweener. I don't really know that I would call him like a true defensive tackle. Kenny Clark, I feel like, is coming up into the twilight of his career a little bit, but is still under contract for the next 3. Devontae Wyatt really is coming up into his final year under contract. His 5th-year option has not yet been picked up. So we also could just say, hey, the Devontae Wyatt experiment may be over. We need to improve our pass rush, kind of like what we have on the edge, even though Rashawn Gary had a down year. Who knows what you're going to get from Lucas Van Ness long term. I do like Brenton Cox Jr. a lot. Let's go Derek Harmon. I think he's got a chance to go top 20. Was really productive at Oregon, and I think is also a good fit in this defense. So Harmon ends up being the pick. Kind of was all over the place there, but I do like who we ended up settling on, which was Derek Harmon. Vikings at 24. Walter Nolan makes a ton of sense here, but look at the way the Rams brutalize that offensive line in the playoffs. Tyler Booker, plug and play. He's available here at 24. I think it's kind of a no-doubter type selection, and he ends up being the pickup for the Vikings to improve that interior, which is just not good. Really isn't. Booker, plug and play type guy. I think you'd really, Kelvin Banks still here as well, right? Like that would be an option on the other side. Not really anything on the interior, so Walter Nolan maybe would have made a ton of sense there, but we can't draft based off of what's happening in the other mock draft, even though that's kind of what this whole video is, but in a different way. I think that you might see a running back go off the board here, and I really, really like Caleb Johnson from Iowa. He is a smooth mover at 225 pounds. Split zone, duo, Caleb Johnson. He's patient. He's got great vision. He's got good size and power. And even though he's much bigger, play style-wise, he's not that different from Aaron Jones. Vikings like Aaron Jones. I think they're going to like Caleb Johnson. Texans at 25. Well, why not pair CJ Stroud with Emeka Ibuka? They're pretty familiar with each other, obviously played together at Ohio State. Texans have been kind of decimated by injuries at the receiver position and losing Stephon Diggs to free agency. Enter Emeka Ibuka. Feels like a good fit there for Houston. But also, Kelvin Banks is available at 25 on the other side. Banks is going to be a guard here. There's no way around it. He will be playing guard. Keep him in the state of Texas. And for those muted who are just clicking this, Kelvin Banks here will be a guard. He projects to move inside, depending on who you talk to. And they like Blake Fisher at right tackle. They obviously like Laramie Tunsil when he's not holding at left tackle. Kelvin Banks Jr. is a big upgrade at guard there for Houston. Rams at 26. Some good tackles still available. Josh Connerly is kind of the one that stands out, even though tackles mostly have just flown off the board in these spots. I would say that we probably just pull the trigger on Josh Connerly. Had a good week at the Senior Bowl, despite one play really where Mike Green dominated him on a bull rush in a one-on-one. But Connerly here is an upgrade at tackle long-term. I think he's going to end up being a first-round pick, and the Rams invest in the trenches here at 26. They did so on the defensive line last year. Now we're going to flip around and do it on the other side. However, on the other side, we're obviously not going to be going with offensive tackle. I do think corner stands out as something that can be upgraded here. They're another team that was hurt by injuries, but Shadé Barron is available at 26, and he is a hell of a player that I think can potentially stick on the boundary or be an incredible nickelback. And I think that position is starting to see a little bit more value when we see what the top ones are able to do and how they're able to impact the game. I think Cooper DeJean is potentially influencing that. I know Brian Branch is influencing that. Shadé Barron is such an incredible player. Thorpe Award winner at Texas. Hook 'em horns, back-to-back Texas Longhorns here at 25 and 26 as the Rams upgrade their secondary. Ravens at 27. You could use something off the edge. There's just not much here. Could use something at tackle. Not really necessarily a ton here. So you get into a bit of a tough spot with who's actually the pickup. Well, I think Jahdae Barron's also a pretty good pickup here for Baltimore because he adds versatility to that defense, which already values that. We know that, right? Barron can play in the slot and be a monster there. Again, hook 'em horns. Reminds me of Ravens corner legend Shockey Brown and Giant, too, to be fair, and Bengal. But Jahdae Barron here, incredible player. And for the Ravens, their secondary really struggled this past season. You know, this lets you play Kyle Hamilton where he should be playing, and then Barron can play in the slot or on the boundary or even potentially back at safety. You have flexibility. If injuries happen, you've got guys that can come in and play a number of different roles and do so at a really, really high level. On the other side of this, though, you could go with early a situational pass rusher. The Ravens actually finished pretty high in the NFL in sacks, but long term, I think you are looking for some replacement or value at least. Pierce can be right away an impactful player as a designated pass rusher, but long term, I think can be a 3-down type of a player. We'll see if he can add weight to that frame. And the Ravens upgrade their pass rush long term there with Pierce at 27. Lions probably would have loved him at 28. He just doesn't make it there. Walter Nolan still available. Kenneth Grant still available. I think the Lions could consider Gray Zabel with this pick. And I think that's probably the direction we're going to go. Zabel had a very, very good Senior Bowl. And I think has potentially played himself into the first round. He's an option at center. He's an option at guard. Again, this is not a tackle. This is a center or a guard. He projects to move all the way inside to center. But he's someone that is really, really strong in pass pro. 6'6", 305, shorter arms. But this is your long-term Frank Ragnow replacement. This is depth at guard. It's potentially a starter at guard long-term. Gray Zabel is a really, really solid player. I think could absolutely end up being a first-round pick. And the Lions feel like a team that makes sense for him. Who's going to take a North Dakota State player? Could be the Detroit Lions. However, if we're not going with something on the offensive line, edge is in play. I really think it could be. Who makes the most sense here? Who's really going to go in the first round? A lot of these edge rushers got off the board in a hurry. Now, we know the Lions value production. I do think Donovan Ezeraku, it's tough to beat in the production department. He was incredibly productive. I also think he's a really good combo with Aiden Hutchinson. He's lighter, he's explosive, but does have long arms. And I think for the Lions that need to increase and upgrade their pass rush, Ezeraku actually does make a ton of sense here at 28. At number 29 for the Washington Commanders. Again, I want to get Walter Nolan off the board. Just haven't really found a spot for it right now. A lot of tackles off the board. We're going to go with Matthew Golden out of Texas. Love him as a player. Throwing the horns up again. Golden has very good hands. He's a very good route runner. And he's good after the catch. He was an elite return man at Houston before transferring into Texas. Had a great season for the Longhorns. Ended up coming up strong, especially down the stretch. Really, really good player. And yet another weapon there for Jaden Daniels, your franchise quarterback. You do need to protect him, though. But looking at the tackles that can do so, it really just has to be Josh Connerly. He's like the clear and obvious selection there for me at 29. And that's just building around your young quarterback. Their O-line played fairly well in 2024, but you could get an upgrade long-term in Connerly. At number 30, Walter Nolan. Instant pickup there for the Buffalo Bills. Big time potential. This is pass rush from the interior, and that's certainly something that I think is a really, really good fit for the Buffalo Bills. But they also need more weapons at receiver. Emeka Ibuka makes sense, as does Matthew Golden. We're going to go with him there at number 30. For all the reasons I just talked about, good hands, good route runner, good after the catch, really solid player. You need more of those in Buffalo. And now that receiving core starts to look a little bit better long-term with a developing Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir, and Matthew Golden. You really have your X in Coleman, your Z in Golden, and your slot in Khalil Shakir. You're starting to build a pretty good combo of receivers you can throw around as we get to the Chiefs at 31. I think you also consider interior defensive line pretty strongly here. I'm going to go Derek Harmon. I think he's the best one available, to be honest, even with Kenneth Grant there, even with Tyleik Williams. Harmon has the best ability to get after the QB, and that's what I value the most from defensive tackle. And Harmon and Chris Jones now prove to be a pretty tough combo. Wish there was a tackle here to take, but end up going with Harmon over Ariante Ursary or Donovan Jackson. Jackson's in play. Chiefs here at 31 could consider that. I mean, all it takes is one watch of the Super Bowl to see that the Chiefs need to upgrade their offensive line, especially at tackle. Joe Thuney's a left guard. He can't be playing left tackle. You might be losing Trey Smith, your awesome right guard, to free agency anyway. Offensive line here in some way, shape, or form makes sense. I'm going to go with Donovan Jackson. Chiefs fans don't want a tackle. We can't develop a tackle. You haven't taken one in the first round since 2013, over a decade ago. Donovan Jackson is a guard, but played left tackle at Ohio State after there was a big-time injury to Josh Simmons. Donovan Jackson came in and did a really good job, especially against top-tier competition in the college football playoff. He was really, really good. And it is a guard playing left tackle, was just what the Chiefs were doing, but he showed that he could stick at tackle and do so at a high level. His size is not the problem. 6'4", 320, I think with verified 34-inch arms. That's kind of the baseline for playing tackle in the NFL. You got to upgrade the unit. And even if you don't like him at tackle, maybe you want to try and develop Kingsley Suamataia, Donovan Jackson, replacement for Trey Smith at guard. You've got some options. As we get to the Philadelphia Eagles Super Bowl champion at 32, which direction do you want to go? It's probably something in the trenches, right? Nick Scorton feels like a pretty obvious fit. Kenneth Grant, but I don't really know that you need a run stuffer as much as you need somebody that can get after the quarterback. We're going to go Nick Scorton. You're losing a lot off the edge here, and really the defensive line in general for the Philadelphia Eagles to free agency. I think you're unlikely to retain Milton Williams. Who knows about Josh Sweat? Brandon Graham, I think, is going to retire probably. So Scorton there does make a ton of sense. Carried some bad weight at A&M this past year, but was really productive for Purdue a couple of years ago. Led the Big Ten in sacks in 2023. So good player. And then with their other pickup, I mean, the world is kind of your oyster here. You could go interior defensive line. You've got some options, but you've also got Emeka Egbuka available here. And I like that fit a lot. He's just available. It feels like the Eagles constantly have like a weird receiver in the mix outside of, you know, your top two stars, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. And I don't know why. I have a feeling that A.J. Brown could end up being like a surprise trade, like by his own request. He wants the football more. He came out and said, like, post-Super Bowl, like, he thought it would be better, but he wanted the ball more. Like, I'm like, come on, dude. You know, you've won the ultimate goal. He wants to be productive. He wants to get, you know, a huge contract and get paid, and he is being paid pretty well right now. But is there a chance the Eagles trade him for draft capital to try and keep this a dynasty, maybe draft a receiver at 32? I think it's an option. Egbuka obviously would be your slot pickup either way here. Brown on the outside, Devontae Smith on the outside, Emeka Egbuka in the slot. Really, really solid, reliable player. I really don't think A.J. Brown gets traded, but either way, I think receiver is something the Eagles could consider at 32 in the event that they don't address the defensive line. This was an interesting idea. The mock drafts I did on the fly, they turned out very interesting to me. I want to know what you guys think down in the comment section below. I had some interesting falls, some interesting rises. I had Simmons going early in both, real early, but I don't know. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below, and I will see you in the next one. Take it easy.